clashes in El Geneina. Dozens were killed and tens of thousands were once again displaced.
نفس الحرب موجود في دارفور أساساً إنه جنجويد والميليشيات يمشوا يهاجموا الناس مع عسكرات نازحين.
The Janjaweed were originally an Arab militia armed by the government to put down the rebellion. They were brutally effective. In 2013, many were absorbed into a paramilitary group called the Rapid Support Forces. For people living here, only the uniform changed.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Amir bin Harun. For today, I want to present about the introduction of the humanitarian intervention. The term humanitarian intervention actions undertaken by organization, usually a state or a coalition of states, they are intended to alleviate extensive human suffering within the borders of sovereign state. Such suffering tends to be the result of government instigating, facilitating, or ignoring the abuse of group with its jurisdiction. This abuse often takes the form of deliberate and systematic violations of human rights, including forced explosions and ethnic cleansing. A state or group of states always intervenes for the benefit of foreigner individual, at least purportedly on account of the alleged commission of cruelties that shock the human. The bond of citizenship is dispensed with, and the act of humanitarian intervention is instead based on fundamental humanitarian values of the international community. Humanitarian intervention has become a major focus on a debate with governments, international organizations, and think tanks, and across a variety of academic fields, including international and comparative law, international relations, political science, and moral and political philosophy. Okay, that's all for the introduction. Thank you.
Assalamualaikum to Firdaus. My name is WAHIDA AMALIN BINTI ZULKIFLI. I would like to present about UN African Union mission in Darfur. Africa's Darfur is a large area. Unfortunately, there are groups of African farmers who have been fighting with Arab herder groups for decades. They are fighting for the land. Due to that, the African Union was established in 2002 to advance human rights and peacekeeping. In 2003, there was conflicts between regional rebel factions and Sudanese government forces. More than 2 million Darfuris are believed to be internally displaced, and the United Nations estimates that 300,000 people have died. Due to Darfur's threat to world peace and security, the United Nations Security Council issued Resolution 1769 in 2007, which authorized the deployment of the first-year hybrid peacekeeping operation, which is the UN African Union Mission in Darfur, UNAMID. It is a hybrid mission, which is a joint effort where a regional organization like the African Union shares the financial, logistical, political, and military burdens with the United Nations. This intervention by United Nations took place as a result of the African continent's lack of financial and logistical support for peacekeeping operations. The United Nations Department of Peacekeeping Operations regular channels fully funding the UNAMID makes the African Union is dependent on the United Nations budget and resources. This proves that intervention is really done by the United Nations in UN African Union mission in Darfur. That's all from me. Thank you.
Hi, my name is NURZAFIRAH binti KHAIRUL ANUAR. Today, I will explain the benefits of humanitarian intervention, which is relief in the distribution of emergency aid to victims. Emergency aid aims to support and protect those who are most affected during a crisis, while also helping to distribute their basic needs. The humanitarian intervention offers the organization logistical support in the form of transporting resources and amending infrastructure in distributing the supplies to the victim. By using delivery capacity, humanitarian organizations or NGOs will work with military units to deliver supplies and support. For example, military units help humanitarian organization to deliver supplies by providing delivery capacity. They are using helicopters, cargo aircraft, and lorries, or by managing airports and seaports. Logistical assistance increases the flow of supplies which are distributed by aid organizations to prevent people from dying. Hence, humanitarian intervention can deliver basic needs to the victims by using many approaches, such as transportation and refugee camps.
The second pros of humanitarian intervention is to use military force to stop human rights abuse and atrocities. When armed groups and government use violence against non-military targets, it is a major human rights violation. The situation must be grave, one in which fundamental human rights are being or are likely to be seriously violated on a large scale, and there is an urgent need of intervention. The successful use of military force can prevent further harm coming to civilian populations. The responsibility to protect also grapples with the question of defining the type of circumstance that should trigger humanitarian intervention. Humanitarian interventions can also create a safe space for civilians to move away from fighting and war. All parties to armed conflicts are responsible for ensuring that the civilian people and population is protected. Humanitarian intervention can stop attacks on civilians through destroying military hardware, limiting governments and armed groups' abilities to carry out atrocities, or lastly, by removing unjust governments from power. This all for the pros of the humanitarian intervention. Thank you.
My name is NURZAFIRAH AYUNI, and the first disadvantage in the humanitarian intervention is the UNSCR as the authorities do not report the real event that happened to the people of Darfur. The UNSCR is the most relevant decision maker in the matter of humanitarian intervention, where foreign countries need to get their approval from them to intervene in any country that oppresses its people. Apart from that, they also want a strong evidence if a country is indeed oppressed by their government, such as ethnic cleansing. However, the Security Council, as the responsible party, does not disclose what actually happened in the Darfur. Even worse, their permanent members keep saying that there is no genocide in Darfur because they have an economic interest in Darfur. The truth was revealed when the NGO that helped the people of Darfur and fought to tell the truth of story that happened there. After the brutality of government Sudan was revealed, there were countries that sent their military to protect the safety of people in Darfur.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is SYAFINI binti Muhammad MURSHIDI. I will be presenting my part, which is the cause of humanitarian interventions, which is the high selectivity. The actions of government are determined by what they perceive as the best interest. Really suggests that joining humanitarian intervention is risky because it is not in the nation's best interest. One of the cases where the act of humanitarian intervention received criticism is when NATO intervened in Libya but not in Bahrain, Syria, and Yemen. The failure to act the same to these countries shows inconsistent moral standards and the priority of its self-interest. Western actors such as UK and USA that leads the act of humanitarian intervention also are limited by global superpower China and Russia, which rarely support these intervention measures. This is because under Section 7 of the UN Charter, humanitarian proposals are agreed largely on the basis of shared interests among the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, which include China and Russia. Next, we will discuss on the conflicting concept of humanitarian intervention and the state sovereignty. Humanitarian intervention violates the concept of state sovereignty because it leads to deliberate and uninvited violation of sovereignty. Thus, should humanitarian intervention infringe the state sovereignty in order to protect human rights? The Article 2, Clause 4 in the UN Charter codified the customary norms of state sovereignty and prohibit use of force against another state that are inconsistent with the purpose of the UN. However, the supporters of humanitarian intervention say it is consistent with the purpose of UN, which is to encourage respect for human rights. Article 42 in UN Charter also states the authority of the Security Council by allowing it to approve the use of force in order to maintain or restore international peace and security.
To sum up, the legitimacy of humanitarian intervention can be said to be limited by the sovereignty, which is the customary norm in the international system. However, what would be the case if the sovereign power is violated and can be said as no longer residing the ruling authority? The answer is, if a country has already violated the sovereignty of their own country, which is oppressing their peoples, the government cannot hide behind the principle of sovereignty to prevent outsiders interfering in their country. For example, in Sudanese government has hidden behind sovereignty to cover up what happened in their country with the help of big powers like China and Russia who have economic interests in their country, where they continue to say that there was no genocide until the case was brought to the knowledge of the world by the NGO itself.
Since the subject has consequence for the value that the international community sets on human life, the debate over humanitarian intervention will always be contentious. It is also evident that humanitarian action frequently fails to serve people and has a number of moral and practical issues. However, humanitarian military intervention has saved innocent lives and it has some positive effects. In the case of Darfur, there are many responsible parties involved to save the victims. Humanitarian intervention is often essential but not always justified. The objectives of humanitarian actions are to save lives, alleviate suffering, and maintain human dignity during and in the aftermath of man-made crises. By using a range of strategies and techniques, it has saved so many lives in a wide range of circumstances.